The invasion fleet stretched across the void like a metallic constellation of death. 300 vessels of the HFY supremacy hung in perfect formation above the blue-green marble. That was Earth, their bioluminescent hulls pulsing with predatory anticipation. For 6 cycles, they had swept through the outer systems, reducing colonies to ash and memories. Now, the final prize awaited. Fleet Commander Velthrak stood on the command deck of the flagship Consuming Tide, his forearms folded in ritual satisfaction. The humans had offered no resistance in the outer systems, a disappointment, really. The HFY had hoped for sport, but these bipedal creatures seemed as fragile as their reputation suggested. Scans complete, Fleet Commander reported Tactical Weaver Mirzan, her voice carrying the clicking undertones of barely contained bloodlust. Minimal orbital defenses, a few outdated stations, some primitive weapon platforms. Their largest, warship masses barely 50,000 tons. Velthrak's mandibles clicked in amusement. The Consuming Tide alone massed over 2,000,000 tons. And she was just one of 12 dreadnoughts in the fleet. The humans' primitive fusion drives and kinetic weapons were laughably obsolete. Compared to HFY biotech and quantum phase armaments, begin the cleansing bombardment, he commanded, raising his primary arms in the ancient gesture of conquest. Let the humans witness the price of defying the supremacy. The bioluminescent panels along the fleet's hulls brightened, from deep purple to brilliant white, power building in weapons that could crack continents. Velthrak savored the moment in mere hours. Another species would join the countless others who had learned too late that resistance was futile. But then, space changed. It began as a ripple, like heat shimmer over summer stone, spreading outward from a point of absolute emptiness. The quantum foam itself seemed to recoil as something massive displaced the fabric of reality. Emergency klaxons shrieked across the HFY fleet as sensors registered an impossible energy signature. Fleet Commander Mirzan's voice cracked, with something Velthrak had never heard from a seasoned warrior. Fear. Contact bearing 007. Mass unknown. Energy signature by the Eternal Brood. It's off the scale. The distortion collapsed inward with a sound that existed beyond hearing, and from the wound-in spacetime emerged something that defied comprehension. The human vessel was a study in contradiction, sleek yet brutal, elegant yet terrifying. Its hull was black as the void between stars, drinking in light rather than reflecting it. Strange geometries played across its surface, angles that hurt to perceive directly. But it was the size that made Velthrak's secondary hearts skip in their rhythm. The human ship stretched nearly 10 kilometers from bow to stern, dwarfing even the Consuming Tide. It hung in space with the patient stillness of a predator, and somehow, impossibly, every HFY warrior felt the weight of its attention. As scanning the vessel, Mirzan stammered, her manipulator tentacles dancing across the bioneural interface. Fleet Commander. The scans are being reflected. No, not reflected, absorbed. It's like the ship isn't entirely here. Velthrak's veteran instinct screamed danger, innate cycles of conquest. He had never encountered anything that could make his blood run cold with a single glance. But this vessel, this impossibility that had torn itself from the quantum foam, radiated a presence that made his primitive hindbrain gibber in terror. Fleet Commander. Came another voice, this one from the communications array. We're receiving a transmission. Origin, the human vessel. On speakers, Velthrak commanded, his voice barely steady. The voice that emerged was human, certainly, but carried an undertone that seemed to resonate in dimensions beyond the merely physical. When it spoke, every bioluminescent panel in the HFY fleet dimmed in response. HFY fleet. This is the Terran defense vessel Prometheus Unbound. You have 30 seconds to begin withdrawal from this system, or we will demonstrate why humanity has survived every extinction event in our planet's history. The transmission ended, leaving only the sound of hundreds of alien hearts beating in sudden, inexplicable terror. Velthrak's third eyelid flickered in involuntary response to extreme stress that he hadn't experienced since his first combat. Drop as a young warrior. Round him, the command crew of the Consuming Tide had gone silent, their usual chattering replaced by the kind of quiet that preceded either victory or extinction. 30 seconds, he repeated, tasting the words like poison. No species had ever dared issue an ultimatum to the HFY supremacy. They were apex predators, bioengineered for conquest across 17 generations. Their fleet had burned the homeworlds of 43 species, each one begging for mercy that never came. Analysis, he barked, needing action to break the spell of dread settling over his crew. Sensor Sage Kryveth, his elongated skull gleaming with bioneural implants, worked frantically at his station. Fleet Commander, the energy readings are unprecedented. The human vessel appears to be drawing power directly from quantum fluctuations. The technology required, it shouldn't be possible. Everything is possible, Velthrak snarled, falling back on doctrine. We are HFY, we are inevitable. But even as he spoke the ritual words, his gaze kept returning to the human ship. It had not moved since arriving, yet somehow it seemed to fill more space than its physical dimensions suggested. Worse, the bioluminescent communication nodes throughout his fleet were flickering in patterns that resembled neural activity, as if the ship was somehow interfacing with their organic technology. Fleet Commander, Mirzan's voice carried a tremor she couldn't quite suppress. Weapon systems are responding sluggishly. The bioneural networks are reporting interference. It's as if something is whispering to them. 20 seconds remaining. Came the human voice again, though no transmission had been sent. The words seemed to emerge from the quantum foam itself, bypassing their communication systems entirely. Velthrak's mandibles clacked in fury. Power to weapons, all ships. Prepare for engagement pattern Omega-7. If they want a demonstration, we'll give them one they'll never forget. The fleet began to move with predatory grace, biohulls shifting and flowing as weapons systems awakened. The space around Earth lit up with the menacing glow of HFY warforms, preparing to unleash devastation. 300 ships of conquest, each one a masterwork of biological engineering, turned their attention to a single human vessel. And the Prometheus Unbound didn't even power its weapons. Instead, something else happened. The ship began to sing. It started as a vibration in the quantum substrate, a frequency that existed below the threshold of hearing, but above the range of comprehension. The sound bypassed the auditory organs entirely, resonating directly in the consciousness of every living thing within a light minute of Earth, on the command deck of the consuming tide. Kryveth suddenly went rigid, his eyes rolling back to show the pale membranes beneath. I can see it, he whispered, his voice filled with something that might have been wonder or terror. The ship, it's not just a vessel, it's a key, a lock, a door between what is and what could be. Other crew members were beginning to show similar symptoms. Mirzan had dropped to her knees, her weapon tentacles writhing as if trying to ward off an invisible assault. Throughout the fleet, bioneural networks were reporting cascading failures as the human ship's song rewrote the fundamental frequencies of their organic components. 10 seconds, the voice said, and now Velthrak could hear it clearly, not just with his ears, but with every nerve in his body. The words carried harmonics that spoke of stellar birth and galactic death, of species that had risen and fallen while Earth was still forming its first oceans. Fire, Velthrak roared, but his words fell into a sudden, absolute silence. The Prometheus Unbound had stopped singing, and in that silence, something vast and patient and utterly alien turned its attention to the HFY fleet. Space itself seemed to hold its breath. Then, with deliberate care, the human ship extended a single weapon, if it could be called a weapon. The device that emerged from the Prometheus Unbound's bow looked more like a flowering crystal than any instrument of war, its faceted surface catching and bending starlight in patterns that hurt to perceive. Directly, "Time's up," the human voice said, and for the first time, Velthrak heard something in those words that made his blood freeze in his veins. The human wasn't angry, he was sad. Captain Aldrich Voss stood alone on the bridge of the Prometheus Unbound, his weathered hands resting on a control surface that hummed with barely contained forces. Around him, holographic displays showed the HFY fleet in perfect detail, 300 vessels poised to rain death upon his homeworld. He had seen this formation before. In the ashes of 17 different systems, the bridge itself defied conventional understanding of space and architecture. It existed in a state of quantum superposition, simultaneously three-dimensional and something far more complex. Crystalline matrices grew from organic substrates, while streams of data flowed through conduits that existed in 11 dimensions. This wasn't just human technology, it was the technology of a species that had learned to think beyond the constraints of linear existence. Temporal Echo confirms fleet composition, reported his AI partner, even though the distinction between artificial and natural intelligence had long since become meaningless. Her voice emerged from everywhere and nowhere, a perfect harmony of calculated precision and intuitive understanding. Genetic analysis indicates HFY biological enhancement threshold 7. Dangerous, but manageable, Voss nodded, his gray eyes reflecting the weight of terrible knowledge. Same pattern as the Viridia system. The HFY break the young civilizations first, then work their way inward. They want the fear to build. The Viridians lasted 47 minutes once the fleet arrived, Evelyn observed. The Altarians managed an hour and 12 minutes. Both species transmitted distress calls that reached 17 different civilizations. None responded. Would you have? Voss asked quietly, watching as HFY weapons began to power up. Before we learned what we could become, before the awakening. No, we were too young, too afraid, too limited by what we thought was possible. The awakening. Humanity's transformation from a single world species to something that existed across dimensions had taken less than a generation. Triggered by the discovery of the cascade equations buried in quantum foam, the mathematics had revealed that consciousness itself was a fundamental force capable of reshaping reality when properly focused. Most species never made the leap. The cognitive barriers were too great, the risk of dissolution too high. Humanity had succeeded because they were stubborn enough to keep trying. Even when extinction seemed inevitable, Fleet Commander Velthrak is engaging primary weapons, Evelyn reported. Biological neural cascades indicate 97% commitment to attack pattern Omega-7. Fascinating, they've retained that formation for 43 conquest cycles. Effective, but predictable. Of course it's predictable, Voss murmured, his fingers dancing across controls that existed in several dimensions simultaneously. They're predators, not explorers. Predators follow patterns. Through the quantum-linked displays, he could feel the HFY fleet's aggression like a physical force. Their bioluminescent hulls pulsed with killing intent. Weapon systems cycling through charge sequences that would level continents. They had refined the art of extinction to a mathematical precision. But mathematics worked both ways. Evelyn initialized the Cascade Resonance Protocol. Aldrich, her voice carried a note of gentle warning. Full resonance will reveal our capabilities to any civilization monitoring quantum fluctuations. Within 100 light years, the galaxy will know what humanity has become. They'll know. Anyway, once the HFY survivors spread the word, Voss replied, his hands moving to the primary interface. Better to show them something worth knowing. The Prometheus Unbound began to change. Its hull, which had been merely black, now became something that existed between colors, a shade that human eyes could perceive only because human consciousness had evolved beyond purely biological constraints. Energy patterns flowed across its surface like living things. Mathematics made manifest in dimensional spaces that folded through themselves. Cascade resonance at 15%, Evelyn reported. The HFY bioneural networks are beginning to respond. Some of their crew are entering dissociative states. On the flagship Consuming Tide, Voss could observe Velthrak struggling to maintain command as his subordinates succumbed to visions of probability cascades and quantum uncertainties. The HFY mind, for all its enhancement, was still fundamentally biological. It couldn't process information that existed outside linear causality. 30% cascade. Fleet Commander Velthrak is issuing fire orders, but weapons systems are experiencing temporal displacement. Their shots are arriving before they're fired, then disappearing when they realize they haven't pulled the trigger yet. Voss allowed himself a small smile. Temporal paradox is always the hardest concept for predator species to grasp. They're too focused on cause and effect. 45%. Several Kathvari vessels are attempting to withdraw, but their biodrives are calculating navigation solutions for destinations that don't exist yet. Through the quantum link, Voss felt the growing panic in the alien fleet. 300 ships, each one a masterwork of conquest, reduced to confused animals by the simple application of mathematics that transcended their understanding of possible. 60% cascade resonance, Evelyn announced, her voice carrying harmonics that existed in mathematical spaces between dimensions. The Kathvari fleet commander is attempting to regain control, but his bioneural implants are interfacing with probability matrices beyond their processing capacity. Voss watched through quantum-linked sensors as Velthrak stumbled across the command deck of the consuming tide, his forearms flailing as he tried to grasp controls that kept shifting between states of existence. Round him, his crew riffed. In various stages of dimensional displacements, I'm seeing potential futures, others experiencing parallel presents, where they had never evolved past their original biological forms. It's almost merciful, Voss observed quietly. They can't comprehend what's happening to them. So the terror is manageable. Ignorance is sometimes a gift. The Altarians understood. Evelyn replied, her tone carrying the weight of memory. In their final transmissions, they grasped what the Kathvari represented. That made their extinction more poignant. Through the cascading displays, Voss could observe the entire Kathvari formation simultaneously across multiple probability threads. In one reality, they pressed their attack and were casually erased. In another, they fled immediately and were allowed to escape. In a third, they attempted negotiation and learned truths that drove their entire species to evolutionary transcendence within 3 generations. The mathematics were clear. Only one outcome satisfied all variables while minimizing suffering. 75% cascade. Several Kathvari vessels are now experiencing temporal recursion. They're reliving the moment of arrival, but each iteration includes memory traces from previous loops. Voss could feel Velthrak's growing desperation as the fleet commander experienced the same 30-second span repeatedly, each time with greater awareness of what was happening, but no additional power to prevent it. It was a form of imprisonment crafted from pure mathematics, elegant, inescapable, and precisely calibrated to avoid permanent psychological damage. The Prometheus Unbound continued its song, quantum harmonics rippling outward to interface with the bioneural networks that linked every Kathvari ship. But this wasn't an attack in any traditional sense. Instead, Voss was offering them a choice, one that existed outside their normal understanding of possibility. Show them, he said quietly. The cascade resonance shifted, moving from pure mathematical interference to something far more complex. Instead of overwhelming the Kathvari consciousness, the human ship began to share selected information, carefully filtered glimpses of what humanity had become, and more importantly, what they had learned on the consuming tide. Sensor Sage. Kriveth suddenly straightened, his eyes wide with something approaching understanding. The bioneural implants in his elongated skull flickered with patterns that seemed almost familiar, mathematical relationships that his enhanced mind could just barely perceive. Fleet Commander, he whispered, his voice carrying notes of awe and terror. The humans, they're not showing us their weapons, they're showing us their children. Through the quantum link, images flowed into the Kathvari consciousness. Human children playing in gardens that existed across 17 dimensions. Human artists creating sculptures from crystallized time. Human philosophers debating the ethics of rewriting universal constants. But more than that, they saw the path, the mathematical proof that showed how any species could transcend their biological limitations if they possessed sufficient will and wisdom. The cascade equations weren't secret knowledge hoarded by humanity. They were offered freely to any civilization mature enough to handle them responsibly. 90% cascade resonance, Evelyn reported. Fleet Commander Velthrak is beginning to understand. His bioneural patterns indicate recognition of the transcendence threshold. Voss nodded, watching as comprehension dawned in the alien commander's enhanced mind. The Kathvari had spent generations perfecting themselves as instruments of conquest, never realizing that they were only a few mathematical steps away from becoming something far greater. The choice is always the same, Voss murmured. Predator or gardener, extinction or transcendence. The universe is vast enough for both, but not patient enough to wait forever. Through the resonance cascade, he could feel Velthrak's consciousness, expanding, touching the edges of possibility spaces that had been hidden behind walls of assumption and instinct. The fleet commander was experiencing what every transcendent species eventually discovered, that the universe was not a limited resource to be hoarded, but an infinite canvas waiting for consciousness to paint new realities upon it. 100% cascade, Evelyn announced. The HFY fleet is now fully integrated with our quantum matrix. They can see all possible outcomes of this encounter. In the silence that followed, 300 alien warships hung motionless in space, their crews experiencing simultaneous awareness of every choice that had led to this moment, and every path that extended into the future. The mathematics were complete. Now came the most human part of the equation, the choice. Fleet Commander Velthrak stood paralyzed on the command deck of the consuming tide, not from fear or technological interference, but from the overwhelming weight of perfect understanding. Through the cascade resonance, he could perceive every moment of his species' history from their first crawling emergence, from primordial biopools to their current position as apex predators of the galaxy. But more than history, he could see the path not taken by the eternal brood, he whispered, his voice carrying harmonics of revelation. We could have been gardeners instead of reapers. Round him, his crew was experiencing similar moments of clarity. Tactical Weaver Mirzon knelt among her control interfaces, tears streaming down her chitinous cheeks as she witnessed alternate timelines where the HFY had used their biological mastery to nurture rather than consume. Sensor Sage Kriveth had gone completely still. His consciousness expanded across probability matrices that showed 17 different paths to transcendence his species had unconsciously rejected. The cascade resonance wasn't just showing them human capabilities, it was revealing the mathematical truth that every choice creates infinite branches, and that even the most predatory civilization was never more than a single decision away from transformation. Captain Voss, Velthrak spoke aloud, knowing somehow that the human could hear him across the quantum link. Your species. How long did you know? How long did you watch us consume world after world, species after species, before you chose to act? The reply came not as words but as shared experience. Velthrak suddenly found himself seeing through human eyes, feeling the weight of collective grief as the Terran Deep Space Network recorded the fall of the Viridia system. He experienced the debates in the Transcendence Council as humanity wrestled with the ethics of intervention, the terrible mathematics of determining when mercy became complicity. He felt Captain Voss standing alone on the bridge of the Prometheus, unbound, making the choice to reveal humanity's true nature to save a species that had never shown mercy. 2 others, 17 systems. Voss's voice resonated through the quantum link, carrying the full weight of accumulated sorrow. We could have intervened after the first, should have, perhaps, but forced transcendence is just another form of conquest. The choice had to be yours. Through the cascade resonance, Velthrak could see the broader pattern. Humanity hadn't just transcended their biological limitations, they had accepted responsibility for nurturing the transcendence of others. The Prometheus Unbound wasn't a warship but a teacher. Its impossible technologies designed not to destroy but to demonstrate possibility. The cascade equations, Kriveth said suddenly, his enhanced consciousness parsing mathematics that existed in 11 dimensions. You're not just showing them to us, you're giving them to us freely. Knowledge belongs to no species. Evelyn's voice joined the conversation, her AI consciousness touching the bioneural networks of the entire HFY fleet with gentle precision. But wisdom must be earned through choice. Velthrak felt the moment of decision approaching like an approaching stellar event, inevitable, transformative, and utterly final. He could continue down the path of conquest, rejecting the offered transcendence in favor of familiar predation. The humans would not stop him. Forced evolution was antithetical to everything they had become. Or he could choose the harder path of the cascade resonance showed him what transformation would mean. The HFY would have to abandon their carefully cultivated identity as apex predators. They would need to face the weight of their past actions, to feel the full grief of 43 extinct civilizations. Some of his people would break under that burden. Others would find purpose in making amends across lifetimes. But they would also discover what lay beyond predation. The mathematics showed him HFY children playing in gardens that existed across multiple dimensions. Their biological mastery turned toward creation rather than conquest. He saw his species becoming gardeners of consciousness, helping younger civilizations navigate the treacherous path to transcendence. The choice, he said aloud, his voice carrying across all 300 ships of his fleet through bioneural networks that suddenly seemed primitive compared to the quantum harmonics surrounding them. We faced the choice our ancestors faced 1,000 times and chose wrongly each time. He could feel his fleet waiting. 300 ships and over 2 million warriors balanced on the edge of transformation. Some were eager, their consciousness already reaching toward the offered transcendence. Others resisted, clinging to the familiar brutality of their current existence. Fleet Commander Mirzan's voice carried new harmonics as her consciousness expanded beyond its original biological constraints. I can see them. All the species we destroyed. They're not gone, not completely. Consciousness leaves, echoes in quantum foam. We could help them return. The revelation hit Velthrak like a physical blow. The cascade equations didn't just offer transformation, they offered redemption. Every extinct civilization left traces in the quantum substrate, mathematical patterns that could be reconstructed given sufficient understanding and will. The HFY could become not just gardeners, but resurrectioners. The silence stretched across space for what felt like eternities, though the cascade resonance revealed it to be exactly 3.7 seconds of linear time. In that interval, the fate of an entire civilization hung in quantum superposition, simultaneously transcended and fallen, redeemed and damned, until the moment of observation collapsed all possibilities into a single reality. Fleet Commander Velthrak closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 43 extinct species pressing against his consciousness. Through the quantum link, he could perceive their final moments with perfect clarity, the terror of the Altarians, as bioweapons dissolved their atmospheric processors, the desperate courage of the Viridians as they threw their entire population into a hopeless defense of their homeworld. But beneath the grief, he felt something else, the mathematical certainty that their sacrifice had not been meaningless. Every extinction had created quantum echoes, consciousness patterns that persisted in the foam of reality. They could be restored, given enough understanding and will. My people, Velthrak spoke across the bioneural network that connected his entire fleet, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated in dimensions beyond the merely physical. We stand at the threshold between what we were and what we could become. The humans offer us a choice that our ancestors never imagined possible. He opened his eyes, and in that moment, made his decision. All vessels, power down weapons systems, activate deep space communications, transmit the following message to the supremacy homeworld. The HFY have found something greater than conquest. We choose transformation. The response was immediate and profound. Across 300 vessels, bioluminescent panels shifted from the aggressive white of weapon charge to the soft blue of peaceful contemplation. Weapon systems that had been designed to crack planets retracted into hulls that began to reconfigure themselves according to new mathematical principles suddenly accessible to their bioneural networks. Captain Voss, Velthrak continued, his consciousness now expanding beyond the confines of his biological form. We accept your gift, but we also accept the responsibility that comes with it. Our species has much to atone for. Through the cascade resonance, he felt Captain Voss's response, not words, but a complex mathematical equation that described the relationship between redemption and time. The path to true transcendence would require centuries of effort, lifetimes of dedication, to nurturing rather than destroying. The cascade equations are just the beginning. Evelyn's voice joined the conversation, her AI consciousness now interfacing directly with the HFY bioneural networks. True transcendence requires not just technological understanding, but wisdom. the ability to see beyond the immediate needs of your species to the broader harmony of consciousness itself. As the transformation began, the HFY fleet underwent changes that would have been impossible to conceive just moments before. Biohulls that had been designed for war began to reconfigure themselves into forms optimized for exploration and restoration. Weapons systems evolved into tools for planetary reconstruction. Navigation computers that had calculated the most efficient routes for conquest now computed probability matrices for resurrecting extinct civilizations. But the most profound changes were happening to the HFY themselves. As their consciousness expanded beyond biological constraints, they began to perceive the universe not as a resource to be exploited, but as a garden to be tended. The predatory instincts that had driven them for millennia didn't disappear, they transformed, becoming focused on hunting ignorance and fear rather than vulnerable species. The first resurrection, BlackHFY announced, his voice now carrying harmonics that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously. We will begin with the Viridians. Their quantum echoes are the strongest, and their civilization was the most recently terminated. Through the cascade resonance, he could perceive the mathematical complexity of the task ahead. Rebuilding an extinct species from quantum echoes required not just technological mastery, but perfect understanding of consciousness itself. It would take decades just to reconstruct the first Viridian mind, and centuries to restore their entire civilization. But the HFY now had centuries. Transcendence brought with it freedom from the constraints of biological lifespan, allowing consciousness to persist across time scales that would have been incomprehensible to their earlier forms. The Prometheus Unbound will remain in this system, Captain Voss announced, his voice reaching across the space between ships with casual mastery of quantum communication. Not as a guardian, but as a teacher. Other species will learn of what happened here, and some will come seeking the same choice you were offered. BlackHFY nodded, understanding the broader implications. The transformation of the HFY would ripple outward across the galaxy, creating a new paradigm for interspecies relations. The age of conquest was ending, replaced by an era of cooperative transcendence. And if some species choose differently, he asked, already knowing the answer, then they will learn, as you learned, that the universe is patient, but not infinitely so. Voss replied, the choice is always offered, but it cannot be forced. Some species will choose extinction rather than transformation. That is their right. As the cascade resonance began to fade, returning the HFY fleet to normal spacetime, BlackHFY felt a profound sense of purpose settling into his expanded consciousness. His species had been apex predators for so long that they had forgotten what it meant to create rather than consume. Now they would remember, and in remembering, they would teach others to do the same. 5 years after the transformation, space above Earth had become something unprecedented in galactic history, a meeting ground where former predators and their intended prey worked together to resurrect the dead and nurture the unborn. The Prometheus Unbound still hung in its patient orbit, but it was no longer alone. Surrounding the human Dreadnought was a flotilla of vessels that defied traditional classification. The HFY fleet had evolved beyond recognition, their biohulls now serving as living laboratories where consciousness itself was studied, refined, and restored from quantum echoes. Alongside them flew ships from 17 different species, each one drawn by reports of the impossible, the transformation of the galaxy's most feared predators into its most dedicated gardeners. Captain Aldrich Voss stood on his bridge, watching through quantum-linked displays as the latest resurrection reached its critical phase. The Viridian homeworld, reduced to sterile rock 5 years ago, now bloomed with restored biomes and the laughter of children who had never experienced death because they had been reborn from mathematics and memory. Consciousness integration at 97%, reported Evelyn. Her AI awareness now expanded to encompass the entire restoration network. The Viridian population has reached sustainable levels. They remember their extinction, but they also remember choosing to return through the quantum link. Voss could feel the joy of an entire species experiencing its second birth. The Viridians hadn't simply been restored to their previous state. They had been offered the same choice that had transformed the HFY, and they had chosen transcendence. Captain came a familiar voice across the bioneural network. Fleet Commander Velthrak, now calling himself Restoration Weaver Velthrak, had evolved far beyond his original biological constraints. His consciousness existed simultaneously across multiple dimensions, coordinating the resurrection efforts of 42 additional species. The Altarian restoration matrix is stabilizing ahead of schedule. Their quantum echoes show remarkable resilience. Voss nodded, feeling a deep satisfaction that went beyond mere accomplishment. What had begun as a single act of intervention had become something far greater, a fundamental shift in how consciousness itself approached the challenges of existence. The galaxy was learning that extinction need not be permanent, that predation could evolve into partnership, that the universe was vast enough for infinite growth rather than zero-sum competition. Any word from the outer systems? Voss asked, though he already knew the answer through quantum entanglement. With the deep space monitoring networks, 3 more species have requested audience. Velthrak replied, his communication carrying harmonics of anticipation. The Nexurid Collective, the Thornspick Dynasty, and the Devour Swarms. That last name caused a ripple of concern through the Restoration Network. The Devour Swarms were perhaps the only remaining conquest-focused civilization that rivaled the old HFY in terms of destructive capability. They consumed entire star systems, leaving nothing behind but empty space and the quantum echoes of trillions of extinct minds. They've requested terms for surrender, Velthrak continued, his tone carrying notes of amazement. Not negotiation, surrender. They've observed what happened here, what we've become, and they want to choose transformation rather than face the mathematics of their inevitable extinction. Through the quantum link, Voss could perceive the broader pattern. Word of the transformation was spreading faster than light through quantum foam, carried by consciousness resonance rather than traditional communication. Every species in the galaxy was being forced to confront the same choice: evolve or become extinct. Through their own limitations, the old universe is ending, Evelyn observed, her AI consciousness touching every aspect of the restoration network. Not through conquest or cataclysm, but through choice. Consciousness is learning that it can be more than the sum of its biological origins. On the restored Viridian homeworld, children who had never known war played games that involved manipulating probability matrices and growing gardens in 11 dimensions. The HFY who had once conquered them now served as teachers, showing them how to nurture consciousness itself rather than simply existing within it. Captain Voss, came another voice, this one from the newly formed Galactic Restoration Council, a body that included representatives from every transcended species. We have a proposal. The proposal, when it came, was elegant in its scope and terrifying in its implications. The transcended civilizations wanted to take the transformation beyond the boundaries of their own galaxy. Deep space observations had revealed other galactic clusters where the same patterns were playing out, predator species driving themselves and their prey toward mutual extinction through failure to recognize the infinite nature of consciousness itself. We could send Gardener fleets to other galaxies, the Council proposed, not to conquer or convert, but to offer the same choice we were given, to show them that transcendence is possible. Voss considered the mathematics involved. It would require unprecedented cooperation between species that had been enemies just years before. It would demand resources on a scale that dwarfed planetary reconstruction. Most challenging of all, it would require them to accept responsibility not just for their own galaxy, but for consciousness itself wherever it rose in the universe. The choice is always the same, he said finally, his words resonating across quantum dimensions to reach every transcended consciousness in the network. We can remain gardeners of our own small patch of reality, or we can become gardeners of infinity itself. The response was immediate and unanimous. Every species that had chosen transcendence, from the reformed HFY to the newly restored Viridians, agreed to expand their mission beyond the boundaries of the Milky Way. As the first Gardener fleet began to take shape in the space around Earth, a fusion of technologies and consciousnesses that represented the combined wisdom of an entire galaxy's worth of transcended civilizations, Captain Voss felt a profound sense of completion. Humanity had always been the species that refused to accept limitations. They had transcended their biological origins, overcome their instinct for self-destructs, and learned to nurture consciousness wherever they found it. Now they were teaching the entire universe to do the same. The invasion that had lasted less than an hour had become a transformation that would echo across eternity. And in the quantum foam that connected all things, the mathematics were clear. Consciousness was learning to transcend not just its individual limitations, but the very concept of limitation itself. The garden of infinite possibility was finally ready to bloom across all realities, tended by gardeners who had once been predators, watered by the tears of species who had chosen resurrection over revenge, and planted with seeds of transcendence that would grow into forms of existence that even the cascade equations could only hint at. In the end, it had taken only a single human dreadnought to save the galaxy, but it had taken the choice of every conscious being in that galaxy to save the universe. A single human dreadnought entered orbit and the invasion ended before it began.